all peoples and marginalized communities in regards to environmental policy and environmental health. But what does this actually mean? So on a local level, this looks like tackling the problems relating to food deserts, water mismanagement, and brownfields. Brownfields are pieces of property that were industrial and are no longer being used. They just kind of sit there and take up space, and they don't really offer anything back to the community. And they're oftentimes contaminated, so they can't really be built upon. But they can be remediated if right funding and resources in place for that. Nationally, tackling environmental justice looks like opposing pipelines, protesting for Flint and advocating for Flint, Michigan, and other areas like Flint. Buffalo, which is in New York, is like that as well. And also advocating for maintaining public land, because a lot of oil companies and energy companies are trying to take public land and turn it into private property so that they can extract natural resources in a way that's not sustainable. And then globally, this looks like climate change, extraction, and pollution. Climate change is the broad one that's in the news and everyone hears about. Pollution, so the US takes its plastics especially, and we export them out to other countries, typically developing or third world countries. So they have to deal with all of our plastic. And this looks like, I don't know if you can see there, the bottom picture. It's oftentimes people in these communities, they are the ones that are left to deal with cleaning up the plastics and the pollution. So this isn't ethical, this isn't fair, this isn't just, and hence environmental justice. So there needs to be policies in place to prevent things like this from happening. Next slide, please. So how this relates to campus organizing and my involvement. So I go to school in Niagara Falls, and there's quite some history with environmental injustice in Niagara Falls. The main one is something called Love Canal. Love Canal happened because there was a company called Hooker Company back in the 20s, and they dumped dioxins and other harmful chemicals into the environment without telling the people of the area what they were doing. And when they got caught, they got in trouble by this. It wasn't public. They didn't publicly get in trouble, but they did get in trouble. So they had to sell the land back to Niagara Falls, back to the government. And they did this for the symbolic price of $1, and the government then decided to build a school on top of where they had dumped all of this nasty chemical gunk. They built an elementary school. So flash forward to the 60s, because no one knew about this. This wasn't made public. So in the 60s, people began reporting and noticing that their health was declining. They noticed that infant mortality rates were rising. They noticed that cancer rates were rising. They noticed pools of black tar melting their children's sneakers when they were playing on the playground. And it has to be noted that this was a community that was somewhat underprivileged. The demographic was pretty much below the poverty line. So this is what typically happens because they don't have the resources, or it's not made public, so they don't know to fight back against this. Yeah, so as a result, activist Lois Gibbs formed the Homeowner Society in the 70s to demand justice and demand reparations for what had happened. I have activist highlighted there because she, and I've met with her and I've spoke with her personally, and she doesn't describe herself as an activist. She describes herself as a housewife that realized her children were suffering and wanted to get involved. And I just think it's important because anyone can be an activist. You don't need any type of special training. You don't need to be an academic. You just need to notice that something is not right and have a voice and make your voice be heard. Um, so that was Love Canal, but it's also important to note that Love Canal wasn't handled in a way that was very intersectional. So even though Lois Gibbs formed the Homeowner Society, it left out a specific group of people in the fight for change. It left out the demographic of renters and those who don't own their properties but are still affected by this. This specifically impacted a area, an apartment complex called Griffin Manor. And the demographic of Griffith Manor was predominantly Black. And there was an activist, Sarah Hodgkins, and her name often gets erased from the history of this. They're making a documentary on all of the women of Love Canal because Lois Gibbs is one of many, but I highly doubt she'll be mentioned. So even though this was a monumental turning point for environmental justice, it still wasn't, it still needs to be analyzed and improved upon. So as a result of Lois Gibbs and Sarah Hodgkins strategizing and advocating, they got the attention of the president. They did this by taking a government official hostage at one of their home association meetings, which is pretty intense, but I applaud them. And it worked. It caught the attention of the president, and the president allowed them to be, the residents of Love Canal, to be moved from where they were living with all the toxic chemicals. So they were moved and it was paid for, and now it's like being remediated. Yeah, so that's history of Love Canal and Niagara Falls. Next slide, please. So now we're going to move to talk a little bit about how to get involved in campus organizing when you get to college. So the first step is to identify the issue that you want to change. For me, this was multiple things, the most prominent one having to do with food waste. And it's important to do research on like how the issue that you want to tackle impacts the surrounding community, how it impacts the student body, and how it ties into national and global environmental injustice issues. And this doesn't, this formula doesn't even have to stay to environmental justice. This can be used for any type of community organizing on campus. So once you identify the issue that you want to tackle, you can move on to developing a solution. This can be a fun process. It doesn't have to be intense. You don't have to know all of the answers. It's really just like a fun brainstorming session. So for example, if one of the issues on campus that you want to tackle is that flooding impacts runoff, chemical runoff from the manure and the, what's the word? Fertilizers that they use for landscaping. So the flooding will bring it down and impact the local community because it will contaminate their properties and their playgrounds and schools. So a fun solution to that could be like planting native biodiversity or getting a big sponge to soak it all up. It's really about getting something on paper. So once you have a few solutions that you want to bring forth to administration and other people, it's about networking. You have to reach out to your peers, administration, professors, club leaders, friends, anyone who will listen and anyone who's interested. It's also very important though, and we will talk about this more later, that the people you're reaching out to are diverse. You can't just reach out to one set of people, even though it's easiest because like-minded people it's easiest to work with, but you need like a diverse group of people with varied skill set. And then once you go from there, you gather all of their opinions and have their input, and then that'll bring us to the next step. Could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I'm going to relate part of my work to what I just talked about. So the issue that I wanted to focus on my campus was composting. and food waste. So college campuses, especially Niagara, because of the system that they use, they contribute 22 million pounds of food on average, 22 million pounds of food waste on average annually. And this food waste winds up in landfills and dumps. And Niagara University's food waste winds up Niagara Falls landfill. Yeah, it is a lot of food. And what's the problem with this is that Niagara University isn't located in Niagara Falls. It's located in Lewiston, which is a bit of a more wealthy town. So for the school to be sending our food waste and our garbage over to the landfill in Niagara Falls, where they have to deal with it and they have to suffer from it, it's unjust. It's an environmental justice issue. Especially this one, the landfill. Sorry, I'm stumbling a little bit. The government had to pay out quite a bit of money in lawsuits because of the way the landfill was impacting the health of the surrounding community. It was upwards of like 1,000 per person, per citizen within a certain radius of the landfill. So it really is an environmental health issue. And our school should not be contributing to it. We should not be contributing negatively to the community that we're trying to be a part of. So that was my issue. The city of Niagara Falls is also a food desert, which will come into play later. Do you guys know what a food desert is? Do any of you want to tell me what it is?
It's a place where it's not easy to get like good healthy food around, if any food at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And what makes it so difficult is income and wealth inequality, infrastructure mismanagement, especially with the wealth inequality. You could have an area that, say, has a Whole Foods in it, but it's 4 miles away from like where people are living. And if people don't have the resources to get to that Whole Foods or even buy the food at that Whole Foods, it's still considered a food desert. It's still an environmental justice issue, and it's still an environmental health hazard. So, yeah, that's in Niagara Falls. Next slide, please. So to combat this and to fix the issue, my team and I came up with composting. So we were going to take all the food waste and divert it from the landfill in the city of Niagara Falls and turn it into something that can be used to make more food, because you use compost fertilizer to and we even added upon it, so we're not just composting for fun, and we're not just composting to get rid of the food waste. We donated the compost after the fact to local community gardens in Niagara Falls. So we're changing that system from a negative relationship that's unsustainable between the school and the community to something that supports the community and benefits them. And also encourages their food sovereignty, which I forgot to mention. Food sovereignty is a community's ability to support itself in regards to food and maintain that. So, such as using community gardens as a way to make food and produce. So, this was a really fun solution, and our networking involved speaking at sustainability committees, setting up meetings with administration, such as the president of our university, and then even further than that, going into the community and talking to people like the mayor of Niagara Falls, which was a really fun experience. So as I was saying before, it's important to have a diverse group of people working on a project, such as like composting for environmental justice. And the way that we did that was different skill sets get allocated different positions. So say you have a journalism major or an English major, they would get in charge of like writing articles and blogging and keeping the public informed about what we're doing. If you have someone who is a STEM majors in biology or environmental science like myself, we're in charge of the mechanics of the situation. So how are we going to get this food to break down from food waste to fertilizer? It's really fun to work on. And just things like that. Yeah. Next slide, I think. Yes, so as I was saying, the next step in organizing for this type of thing is you need to create a list of tasks and a bunch of steps as to what needs to get done and how you're going to get it done. So, for example, we wanted to compost. How are we going to do that? What needs to get done? Who do we need to talk to? And what order do we need to do these things in? So the first step is to get permission from the school, which you can bypass, especially with something like composting. It's not like they can tell you you can't compost, but for some things you need permission. The next step was figuring out the system and how we would be collecting the food waste. What days are we going to be collecting it? Who in the dining hall staff do we need to talk to pick it up? Where are we going to be placing it once we pick it up? Where are we going to be moving it to after? So things like that. The second step I kind of already talked about was allocating the responsibilities. Yeah, I forgot to mention though, like, it's okay if there's friction at first. It's okay if there's moments where you need to take a step back and like rearrange things or reallocate things. Like I mentioned, English majors might be good at writing articles, but that's not always the case. That's just a generalization. So it's okay if you start off with one responsibility and then shift to something you're more comfortable with. That way things are more coherent with the group. And then lastly, the most fun step is to gain campus support. And you do this through hosting activities, forming alliances, attending committees, and then I'll talk about the last one there in a second. We hosted some really fun activities. Maybe my friends didn't find this fun, but I found it fun, where we would have days when it was rainy and we would go out and collect worms for the compost. Yeah, and then even just by doing that, you're making yourself seen on campus. So while we were collecting the worms, the student body president happened to pass us and she was like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And that's a great opportunity to be like, "Hey, we're collecting worms for compost because it's an environmental injustice issue that our school contributes so much food waste to the Niagara Falls landfill." And it's like a great moment to have that connection. And that's what happens when you put yourself out there and host activities. So forming alliances, this is going to be your clubs. You need to get involved with clubs, with the presidents of clubs, and you need to find a way to connect the different clubs to one another. So, for example, even though your specific task or your specific project focuses on environmental justice, that doesn't mean you have to keep yourself in that box. You should be attending activities and events like of all calibers. I don't know the word there, but so for example, we would go to LGBTQ parties that the LGBTQ Alliance was hosting, and we would make ourselves known there, or talk to, who else did we talk to? Talk to the environmental club, talk to the social justice club on campus, all of that stuff. And then lastly, demanding meetings with administration. This is tricky, and I would recommend that this portion be left to those with more experience, such as like seniors or professors that you align yourself with, because a lot of times universities don't like freshmen coming in and being like, "Hey, this is wrong and we need to change that." I learned that the hard way. Yeah, you just have to keep the pressure on and not let them ignore you. And that can be done through social media, that can be done through having upperclassmen setting up meetings, many different things. Next slide, please. Okay, this is my last slide. The most important thing out of all of this is to have fun, because it can get very negative to just be caught up in all of the hard work that needs to be done and all of the people that are impacted by the negative things that your school is contributing to. And it can be really easy to just get stuck, oh, this is it done, we need to work, work, work. It's okay to have fun. I have pictures of when we collected the worms. I wish you could see my friends' faces because they don't look too happy, but it was still fun. And I also have some pictures from like other events, like a protest. That's where you would make connections to other people in the community. Here we were having my organizers, my fellow student organizers, and I helped create an event in which we celebrated the cleaning crew on campus and the workers and the landscapers. So there's a picture of that there, and that's a good way to get in with administration. Have voting, voting, promote, voting promotion rallies, just a bunch of different things. Okay, that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Trina. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
All right. So we wanted to ask you a couple of questions. Christina or Rihanna, who wants to go first?
I could go first. So would you say your school is supportive of like what your solutions were to like the waste?
That's a good question. So I found that the school is supportive with things that make them look good and are cost efficient and don't cost a lot of money to do. So they were supportive at first because what do they care if a bunch of students are taking their food waste and turning it into compost? But as you go up and try to build the project, you're going to see more friction as you demand more things. So we don't just want a bunch of students randomly composting. We want this to be like ingrained into the system and the culture of Niagara, which costs money and resources. So that's when we started to see less support. That's a really good question.
So you would describe your work as like near like would you say it's successful?
Yes. I mean, I would think so. I hope so. We were able to do it for 1 year. This past year, it was a little bit harder because we were demanding more things. So they'll do things like stop talking to us or stop responding to emails. But thankfully, with the networking, if you build a big enough of a community that cares about it, including professors and administrators themselves, they're going to keep pushing for it. So I would say that it's successful, and I would say that we still have a far way to go to be even more successful.
The questions I had like during the slideshow, you already answered like a lot of them. Like I was gonna ask if you noticed like any problems of your college and how you addressed it. But another question I also had, once again, you already answered it, and it was about like how can you really get to that point where you are successful and like actually inciting change, because like in my high school I really didn't like, well, like this applies to like all schools in Philly honestly, where there's so much food waste because you're forced to take a fruit and stuff, but also like the plastic utensils, like the overuse of plastic. And I think so much of it could be solved if we, first of all, had recycling bins and weren't forced to take food we know we wouldn't eat. But it's like particularly at my high school, since it's small, I never won I never like when I was younger, I never really saw myself going for any leadership positions or really trying to put myself out there until recently. But even now, I think at my high school, I feel like I would be hesitant to like join any clubs or like go for leadership positions like in the student council or a class representative or whatever, a, a student position that I could have that would possibly influence some change because my school is small and because I feel like the system for getting into those positions where you could influence a better change gets taken up by people who are popular, like way more popular than me. So it's like, how do you fix that? How do you like get past that?
Whew, that's really understandable. And I remember feeling the same exact way when I started. I still struggle a bit with putting myself into like official leadership positions. So I'm still hesitant to be involved with student government in a way where like I have a chair, I have a seat. So if you want to bypass that, you just gather a small group of people yourself and then you start leading that way. You don't need to go through them. And then once you are doing the work, you're going to be noticed. And then you'll have the, I really don't want to say clout, but I don't know what other word. You'll have the clout to like put yourself in those leadership positions more officially. And people will know who you are. I know it's hard to overcome like popularity contests in high school and even college. But if you're working on something that's important, you're going to be noticed, especially if you stick to it.
Thank you. Another question I had would just be like, have you ever heard of those like spoons that are made out of like food? It's like a really dry food. I was really interested in those spoons when I first saw them like a long time ago and was just like wondering why the heck we aren't like implementing into our own school systems and replacing all our plastic utensils with those, because this honestly sounds like such a great idea. But I just wanted to know if like you've ever heard of it and your thoughts about it.
Yeah, have you had some?
No, I have not. I've only ever seen it.
Yeah, one of my professors, she was my environmental thought professor. She gave us out some, and it was really interesting because it makes so much sense. Like you have a spoon, it's edible, you eat it when you're done, and then there's no waste. I have no idea why more people don't like implement that. I wish they would. Yeah, they're really cool.
I had a question. I have like two questions. First one, I don't know if anyone else was thinking about it, but I feel like I should know this, but why worms? How does that help with the composting?
So worms are detritivores, which means they break down nutrients into chemicals back into nutrients. So they'll eat the food waste and then poop it out. Sorry, but that poop is what turns into fertilizer. It's really cool. Oh, and they'll multiply. So like if you cut one in half, they'll multiply in the compost system. So even as you're turning it, and then you just get more and more of them, and then they keep eating, and then you get a lot of fertilizer.
I just learned something new today. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you, what role does public transportation play when it comes to food deserts?
A huge role because if you don't have public transportation or if you don't have reliable public transportation, how are people going to get to grocery stores and how are people going to get to places where they are capable of getting fresh produce? So yeah, a huge part. Um,
Sorry, I have one more question. I know you mentioned that the university supported you up to a certain level, but how much, and I want to say in the university, I'm assuming I'm talking about like leaders in the university, but how much support did you have from like your professors, advisors, and other admin at the school for your projects?
um, it was 50-50. Some professors were more supportive than others, but you just have to find the ones that are supportive and are interested in these types of things. Um, And I'm like a firm believer that like student movements need the support of at least some sort of faculty. Not like wholly, you can still do it on your own, but it's important for them to be just as involved as they expect students to be. And I like to hold them accountable for that. So we were able to find quite a few professors that were supportive, especially like the environmental science professors or STEM professors, but also social justice professors as well.
Awesome. Thanks for answering my questions.
I have a question, if that's okay. Thank you so much for this. It's so informative. I just was thinking about how you said, you know, you can start small with just a group of people or an idea and then grow from there. And I was curious about your project and how small it started and how you were able, like how quickly you were able to grow it, and if it was just you and your friends or your neighbors, or you had to do different types of connecting with people, like how it really went down.
It started with me saying one night we would have, I was a part of something called the Justice Program, and they had nights where you would just brainstorm about ideas on campus that you have for change. And I was just like, hey, I want to compost. I think that would be cool. So then it started off with that. And then me and a small group of my friends just doing it on our own. Composting our own food waste is what it started with, to see if like that was even plausible, and then moving to like talking to upperclassmen, and then the upperclassmen would get us in touch with the professors that they were close to, and then the professors would send emails to administration, and then administration would send emails to the president of the university, and then the president of the university would get us connected to the mayor of Niagara Falls. So yeah, it just really snowballs. But we did get to a point where we were collecting all of Niagara's pre-consumer food waste in 4 bins outside of the building that I was living in, and just throwing dirt. And that's like what we were talking about. You just have to do it. They can't tell you you can't. Oh, one more connection I forgot to mention, but is important for things like this, is the staff. So like cleaners, landscapers, all of those kinds of people you really want to be close to and you want to make friends with, because there's a picture in the top, I don't know what it is, right or left, but we're collecting the leaves from the landscaping crew. So they're a good team to have and a good support system to have, because they also have a few ideas about what can be changed on campus, because they're not always treated the best.
Trina, I also have a question for you. I was going to ask, what made you decide to reach out to staff, especially thinking about people like the landscapers and, you know, people who work in the dining halls and, you know, kind of like the non-faculty staff at the university? What made you decide to do that, and how did you form those relationships?
I feel like I'm probably not the best at giving advice at this, because I feel like I probably did it unconventionally. I would just make friends with them at first, and then they would hear what we were talking about, and they'd be like, oh yeah, you're composting, you should see all the food waste that we have to deal with back in the kitchens. And then it'd be like, oh really, could you get me in touch with your supervisor? And they'd be like, yeah, of course. So it's really being friendly. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Trina. Does anyone else have any other questions for Trina? And then Trina, I want to open it up for you to ask us questions as well.
I have a question for the safety captains. Christina, you mentioned in your high school that there was a lot of food waste. Are there any other issues that you see around your high schools relating to the environment that you wish you could change?
Well, I already briefly mentioned it before, but there's like no recycling bins, just like how I don't really like, at least not in public school districts. I know from like a friend that they go to like this they go to a private high school, Franklin Town. So that, I think they have like recycling bins, but to my knowledge, a lot of school district of Philadelphia public high schools, they don't have recycling bins. And like I remember in my freshman year of high school that like someone was like running for one of the student council positions, promising everyone that she would get us if she got in, she would get us like the recycling bins, because everyone wanted recycling bins. Like this had been like a thing we all wanted, and it just never happens. And I don't know what ever happened to that idea, like whether she just didn't go through with it, or if like something was actually stopping her, someone higher than her was stopping her. I guess another like environmental problem though, besides the trash cans, would be, there's like a lot of paper waste, I think, but it's like in my high school, it's like the environmental problems at my high school are not exclusive to my high school. They probably apply to a lot of other high schools. So like there's a lot of paper waste. Like I think especially for my biology class, I don't I don't need like big packets of paper like how they were doing. And I don't know, I just wish that we we had options where we didn't need to like print out so many things and just have these big heavy packets laying around that like it's like after you're done you don't even want to look at it anymore, you just throw it away and it's gone. It's like, what's the point when I could have just like read this on the computer?
Well, depending on what kind of paper it is, it can probably be recycled into the compost, right? If it's brown paper,
Yeah.
without a lot of ink or whatever, you can recycle it right into the compost. Trina, I'm wondering if there, oops, I muted myself. I'm wondering if there's anything that you, looking back on the last year, anything that you would do differently. So like a lesson learned, like, ooh, if I had a chance to go back and do this over again, I would have done B before A, or I would have made sure to include so-and-so, or I would have gone faster or slower. Anything like a lesson learned that you want to share?
Yes, I feel like I would have made it more public. I didn't really rely on social media as much as I should have. Our team didn't. We should have been doing that. We should have made a school account and we should have been promoting it a lot more. And I feel like that would have gotten us a lot more engagement. So that's something I would do. And then another thing that I probably would do differently is I would probably speak up a lot more, because it can get very intimidating when you're sitting in front of the president of the university and all of the people below him. It can get pretty intimidating. And I remember a couple times where I wanted to say like, hey, there's a solution for this, or hey, like we have already figured that all out. And yeah, so I just would be a bit bolder with that.
Thank you, Trina. Any other questions for the safety captains? All right. Well, thank you so much again, Trina. Round of applause for you.
Thank you for listening to me.
This was really great. It's definitely appreciated, and I think it's so important to be able to tap into your community and to be able to make some positive change. All right.
Hey guys.
All right. Thanks, Trina. Have a good night. All right, we're going to transition back to